Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the ICG's Digital Academy webinar series. I'm Sally Alsop, the committee member responsible for our webinar programme. So this morning, we're delighted to welcome Jenny Kedros, ICG member, climate activist and founder of Kedros Consulting. After an absorbing and inspiring 12 years leading research projects for high-profile clients at the award-winning London-based research agency Shift Insight, Jenny created Kedros Consulting. She now offers expert independent research services while also spending time building on her increasing passion for addressing the climate emergency, expanding and deepening her knowledge and experience in climate education, addressing eco-anxiety, and how to overcome barriers to climate action. Jenny will be talking to us today about the relative impact our individual and our research activities have on carbon emissions, the most impactful things we can do to reduce them without compromising on research quality, and how to dive deeper and gain a carbon literate certification from the Carbon Literacy Project. As usual, we'll have a Q&A session at the end. So if you have a question to ask or would like to add something to the discussion, then either type your question or comment in the chat box, or simply turn on your webcam, raise your hand, and then you can ask Jenny your questions yourself. So before we begin, here are some more events. You can see we've still got a packed agenda for the June and July summer months. Don't forget that we're able to offer great value sponsorship opportunities with each of our webinars and online events. And all you have to do is to get in touch with Lucy if you have any questions about that. Okay, so now I'm going to hand over to Jenny.
Hello, everybody. Hi. Thanks so much for joining and sparing your time, which I know is super precious. It's really nice to see people live. I'm just going to share my screen and organize everything. Organize my screens and my windows.
Looking good. Just need full screen mode.
Yeah, coming in.
Fantastic.
Okay, fab. Great. So actually, I'm sorry, I'm just going to rearrange things a little so I can see the chat. It won't be one sec. Okay, lovely.
So it's
your patience. Okay, can you? Oh, that's not.
Screen mode.
Oh, sorry. What's happened here? How about now?
That's great. Perfect.
Great. Okay, lovely. Thanks, everybody. So great. Sorry about that slightly false start. So thanks so much for your time. As Sally's given me a lovely introduction already. But yeah, I was Research and Insights Director at Shift Insight. Now I'm working across two strands. So I'm carrying on with research in education and sustainability. And also I'm increasingly working in climate education training. And this is kind of a part of that strand of my work, really. So first of all, just a quick question. I would love everyone, please, if you could put up your hand if you believe, you can either wave if your camera's on, or you can put your little hand up on the Zoom screen. If you believe that man-made climate change is real and that quick action is necessary. Great. Okay, lovely. Looks like we are on the same page here. Thank you very much. Okay, now, thank you, everyone. I would like you to keep up your hand if you really believe you know kind of exactly what it is that we need to do to solve it. Okay, lovely. Thank you, everyone. Well, I agree. I mean, it is a really, really complex issue. And hopefully what we learned today is going to help a little in helping us all to get there towards that understanding. So I will not going to lie to you. I'm going to start on a bit of a negative note. So there is no doubt that climate change is happening right now and that it's pretty bad. We can't shy away from this. And if we do, we absolutely can't solve it. So this is why I've kind of started with this kind of rather kind of immediate impact. So at the moment, we've seen like extreme weather events. We're seeing it in the news all the time. So floods, wildfires, catastrophic storms, ruined crops. And globally, many people have lost their lives and many more have lost their homes. And in the UK, we've had much more frequent flooding, coastal erosion, much reduced crop yields, as well as staying steadily increasing average temperatures. So in 2023, there were over 220 extreme climate events and a 30% increase in fatalities caused by climate events on the previous year. And this week in the news, we've heard about how the fear for Olympians competing in Paris, where temperatures are expected to rise so much that it could be impossible for athletes to compete. So it's kind of starting to impact on all sorts of people's lives all over the world in loads of different ways already. And scientists are often really despairing. So after decades, like absolute decades of trying to get the message across, they just don't see any action. And you may have seen the recent Guardian survey of climate scientists, where the majority are now expecting global heating to pass the 1.5 degrees C target from the Paris Agreement and possibly even move to 2.7 degrees C if we carry on the trajectory we're on. But having said all that, and coming from scientists too, there is some hope. So this is a brilliant kind of climate haiku, which a scientist called Kim Nicholas put together. So that says, it's warming, it's us, we're sure, it's bad, but we can fix it. And let's focus on this last line and try and kind of lift the mood a bit. So we can fix it. We have all the technology we need to move to a cleaner, renewable world. We have solar, we have wind, we have EV batteries that are becoming increasingly more efficient and increasingly cheaper. And we just need the social and political will to make it happen and decarbonise. And we know that every single degree of warming prevented can reduce the harm to humans and nature in the future. So there's no point saying it's too late. It's never too late. There's no end point at which it's not worth trying, even if we go over the 1.5 degrees target, which is really likely. Okay, great. So I know I've started on this really negative note. I'm sorry. I'd like to get a sense of how you kind of all feel about this. So if you could jot down in the chat right now, just 3 words of how you're feeling. So I'm struggling now, Sally, because I can't actually see the chat.
Okay, how can I help? Do you want me to read out?
Would you be able just to read out some of the words? That's fab, thank you.
Okay. Scary, depressing, alarming, worried yet hopeful, overwhelmed, anxious, confused, anxiety, hope, stuck, powerless, sad, frustrated, cross, frustrated, sad, scared, helpless, unsure what to do, concerned for my son, scared, helpless, kids.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, this is just like, we are hearing this so much now, and you are not alone. We've got this whole range of world we can see. We're not feeling good. So at Shift, we kind of got this sustainability, as I said, was like a key specialism for us there, including kind of environmental sustainability, but also kind of audience research around attitudes to climate. And in this research we conducted a couple of years ago, we found that 68% of people did experience some form of climate anxiety. And this can really translate itself into kind of emotions and physical impacts. So they might be things like irritability, sleeplessness, sadness, numbness, helplessness, all the words that you've kind of used as well, sort of anger and despair. but they also can translate even into physical impacts like nausea and panic attacks and so on. But it can be actually, it's really important to step back, like to have those feelings and to recognize that it's a completely natural human emotion in the situation that we find ourselves in right now. So the research states that this kind of feeling is perfectly normal, but it also generates kind of that motivation that we need to act. And this is something that we can really harness. So some of the things that we can do as part of this, as part of acting on that feeling, and that's what we're going to look at today. But more broadly than what we can do in our sector and in our work, there are some things where we can build communities locally. We can like look at our professional networks too and build community and start talking about the issues there. There are millions of different groups which have all sorts of different kinds of values. It might be anything from joining a climate cafe, a local conservation group. You might start kind of an energy saving consortium in your community, or you might want to join Extinction Rebellion and go on marches. It's like there's so many ways that you can find a group that matches your values. And then the other thing that's really brilliant is to expose yourself to positive news. I subscribe to Positive News, which is a fantastic resource, and it's a really great knowing that there's kind of a lot of human endeavor out there. There's a lot of brilliant people working towards this thing. The tech is there, there's loads of innovation, and hearing scientists talk about technologies is really inspiring and hopeful. But most important of all, we really need to start talking about it. This is a quote from a fantastic climate scientist called Catherine Hayhoe. So she says, like, the most important that we can do to climate change is to talk about it. We know the topic can actually be really hard to talk about. In fact, it's increasingly hard to talk about. It's become extremely politicized. Many people understandably kind of shy away from it for fear of sounding preachy or judgmental or causing conflict. But if we know about it, we can start talking about it sensitively and intelligently. This is going to be really important in our work as well, to normalize this conversation. And hopefully what we're doing today can start contributing to that by looking at it in the context of our working lives, with our colleagues as well, and as part of the audiences that we work with. So how can we start doing it? So this is what we're going to look at today. I'll just whiz through these because obviously you've seen the outline, but we're going to look at carbon literacy. We're going to look at what a ton of carbon looks like and what it means. We're going to look at the example of running focus groups and all the different things we can do there. We're going to talk about the insights sector as a whole and how it's doing. We're going to look at the steps we can take to reduce our own sector's emissions. We're going to look at what some other people have done too as well to get some inspiration. And we're going to look at how we can maximize our organization's impact. At the end, I'm going to just tell you a little bit more about how you can become carbon literate and a little bit more about the training, and then we'll have some time for some questions. So great. First of all, what is carbon literacy? This is the definition that the Carbon Literacy Project use. So it's awareness of the carbon costs and impacts of everyday activities and the ability and motivation to reduce emissions on an individual, community and organizational basis. And to put it more simply, that's understanding what I actually need to do, actually doing it and seeing that I've done it. So this is the main concept. And one of the ways that I like seeing that is if you imagine going to the shop and you go into the shop and get a pint of milk and you find that it costs £10, you're going to know that that's not right. The aim of carbon literacy is to sort of start attaching those sorts of quantifiable amounts of carbon to the different activities and the things we do and the things that we buy. So in terms of kind of grams, kilograms or tons of carbon, basically. So we're going to have a look now at what a ton of carbon looks like and sort of start visualizing that a bit. So there are lots of different ways of visualizing it. If you look online, there's all sorts of ways of doing it. This is one way. This is from Tim Berners-Lee's book, How Bad is Bananas, which is what is used extensively as a source in my training. So if you look at a normal kind of garden water butt, you need 2 of these full of burning oil to make 1 ton of CO2e. So if you want, this equates as well to 1 passenger driving from London to Glasgow and back in a large SUV vehicle. And if you want a visualization for kilos and grams, so a kilo is the same as burning a milk bottle full of oil, and a gram is the same as burning like the size of a tiny chickpea. Just a note on this CO2e reference. So we often use carbon to refer to greenhouse gases, and you'll see this CO2e reference here as another way of referring to it. This is just because it's really important to remember that the greenhouse gases are not just carbon dioxide, but a lot of other harmful greenhouse gases too. You will have heard of methane, nitrous oxide, refrigerant gases. Although carbon dioxide is the predominant greenhouse gases, the other gases are there are much smaller proportions in the atmosphere, but they're much more powerful. So when we're talking about the impact of carbon on the environment, we're really talking about the impact of all of these greenhouse gases together, which are all generated by different activities or different human activity. So another way of thinking about this is in the actual kind of size or volume of the gas that's emitted when the oil or the fossil fuels are burned. So for this one, you can look at a ton of carbon being about the same size as a large house. And then if you also think about the average person of someone in the UK being around 13 tons, so that's equivalent to around 13 large houses, so like a street of houses kind of thing. And now if you think back to the trip to Glasgow in the SUV, so that's one trip, is about the 13th of a person's carbon footprint. So if you think that's a pretty hefty amount of carbon. Great. So I'd like you just on your own now just to do a quick exercise just for 1 minute. I'll put a timer on my phone. I'd like you to imagine that you are writing a method design and you're costing for 3 focus groups to take place in Glasgow. So let's say for the purposes of this exercise that you're based in London. And if you could jot down every decision you need to make, which is carbon related. And I'll put on the timer now. Great, thanks everyone. So I hope you've got a few ideas down there. I'm going to show you now some of the ideas of some of the examples that can really make an impact. So if we look at this table here, so this is, if you look at the first column in option A, that's the high emissions option. So imagine that you've taken a flight from London to Glasgow. That's obviously going to be the highest emissions there. That's 368 kilograms of CO2e. That's the average emissions of one passenger on a return flight from London to Glasgow. Then you might stay in a hotel. You might stay in a hotel which, like, when you go into the room, the TV's on, it's got loads of lights on already, heating's on, it's far too hot, you open the window. You might have a really high carbon dinner, like eat beef for dinner and fruit and veg that's been imported from the other side of the world, for example. You might stay for one night, you might use all of the towels and all of that. If you chose the medium option, that's like the orange one here, you can still conduct your groups face to face, but you could just make some changes which are going to have a really, really huge impact. So you can take the train, that's only 64 kilograms of carbon compared with the 368. So obviously that's like the major issue there. But as well as that, you can kind of think more about where you stay. You might stay in a more eco-conscious kind of bed and breakfast, for example, with like thoughtful owners. You might have a low carbon meal. But also you can think about like where you locate your groups. You make sure that it's in a place where your participants are able to get there by public transport. That can make a really big difference. So you can see there by car, it's taking 79 kilograms instead of 6 for all of the 15 people to get to the groups and back. And then if you consider running those groups, that kind of thing, or that kind of group, once a month over the year, you can really see where those savings are really starting to add up. So what's really notable here is you hear a lot of people thinking, you know, what if I'm really going to reduce my carbon in my field work, it's really going to compromise the quality of the field work that I'm conducting. It's really important to be face to face. But we can see here that even just using a more thoughtful approach can make some really, really, really big differences. And then obviously, you know, it's worth thinking, you know, at all points, do I really need to conduct this work online? Because if I can face to face, because if I can do it online, then obviously that's going to be really minimal in its emissions. It's just the carbon resulting from the Zoom call. Okay, fab. So we're going to move on to now look a little bit at what the Insight sector's doing. So we've used a lot of stats from the Insight Climate Collective report that was written in 2019. They calculated the Insight sector's footprint equaled nearly around 100,000 tons of carbon. So it's super easy to remember. It's the same as heating 12,000 houses for a year, charging the world's 6.3 billion smartphones twice, or driving to Mars. So if you're thinking about a UK's individual carbon footprint, it's equivalent to about 7,500 people's footprint. So in 2020, during COVID, that almost halved. Since the Paris Agreement, the UK's had a legally binding commitment to reduce emissions by 68% by 2030, which really isn't very far away. And we as a sector need to be a part of that. To formalise it within our sector, one thing we can do is sign up to the MRS Climate Pledge. You may have seen this all come around. It's recently been updated from the Net Zero Pledge. Changes are there to kind of encourage more people to participate, but it's also added in a little bit more accountability each year. So this is probably the bit you come for. So what can we do to make the biggest impact in our sector? So this is the proportions of the carbon footprint. So you can really see that over half of it is air travel. So reducing travel for business and to conduct field work is absolutely the most impactful thing we can do. Obviously, this really applies to those in agencies conducting international research and having to travel a lot, but also for those with international offices. And I've run the training with quite a few people in these circumstances, and this is a really, really hard thing to tackle. But following, coming next after air travel, electricity is a huge one. So obviously this is a huge area to tackle. We need to look at how we manage energy in our offices and homes when we're working from home. We need to look at all the different kinds of hardware and software that we use. We need to think, and then like looking at catering, although it's low, it's 4%, we can think about how we tackle our hospitality approaches, and during field work we can reduce meat kind of as a default, for example, and we can be really conscious of our approach to storage and hosting and processing. I just added this in as well, just to kind of highlight the significance of air travel here. So it is our biggest single emitter, as I say. it fell to 32% in COVID, but it's just worth highlighting that this one return flight is the same as 2 average carbon footprints for a colleague for 2 whole years. And that's even more if you're traveling business class. If it's first class, I think it's ×4 that because of the space on the plane. Okay, so there are a few steps you can take that will have a huge impact right away. So looking at greening your supply chain, this is like eliminating unsustainable sourcing in your supply chains. So if you're working with suppliers who also have a net zero target and can demonstrate steps to achieving that, you can actually demand that or ask them the questions to kind of encourage more people to take this seriously. You can ask them to respond to questions about their net zero commitments and their standards. And there's also, we'll talk about this in a minute, but you can also start asking your clients these questions too. You can stop using dirty energy and you can switch to clean power. Obviously, this is huge. But as well as this, we can start considering how to save the energy that we're using. This is really important for agencies who are hosting their own data centers and servers, which will use lots of energy. We can just be more conscious about the way we use lights and heating and air conditioning and so on, turning off machines at night. And then it's really important to think about the little things that we're doing all day. So things like emailing, it's like each email is actually 17 grams of CO2, Mike Berners-Lee reckons. So although it may feel like a tiny amount, we're just doing it all day long. We're like copying people in that might not necessarily need to be copied. These sorts of things, it's just like they're small things, but they can just be built into our daily lives. A little word here around AI as well. I know this is of real interest for us right now. We're going to be using it more and more. So it does use a lot more carbon, making an AI query. So one ChatGPT query is equivalent of 4.32 grams compared with a Google search which is 0.2 grams. So it's like over 4 times more. There is some argument that if you're actually generating a whole kind of article with AI, that's actually going to be less than if you're kind of spending time writing. But obviously there are all sorts of other implications there. But yeah, it's definitely worth considering that this is a carbon intensive kind of process and it's going to be happening more and more. And there's a lot more in the press around that at the moment as well. One of the absolute biggest things you can do, though, is greening pension funds. So this might be your own, might be your company's, and this applies to all of these things apply to ourselves as individuals, but also in our businesses. So a statistics that's often quoted from Make My Money Matter or Make Your Money Matter is that having a sustainable pension is 21 times more impactful than going vegetarian, changing your energy provider and giving up flying entirely. So this is like, if there's one thing you can do, it's obviously a giant thing. And this is one of the concepts of the Carbon Literacy Project, is just understanding where that impact can be really, really great. So great to recycle, but really like ethical pension fund, that is going to like trump everything. So this is the key areas to address in the sector. So we need to, and this is a part of the net zero pledge as well, sorry, the climate pledge from the ORS. We need to start counting our carbon, we need to report on and reduce our emissions, and then we need to remove what can't be reduced. So this is referring to offsetting here. I just wanted to mention it quickly. It's a really, really deep subject and far too much for a webinar of this nature. But there will always be some residual emissions, and to reach net zero, we will need to offset. I have great video explaining the issues if you're interested, and I can send it over. But the rule of thumb is to consider offsets which remove carbon and don't avoid them. And I can really happy to talk to you more about it later. Educate and engage, this is part of what we're doing now. And then greening your supply chain. These are the key areas if you want sort of 5 steps to start with, these are the 5 steps. Also the influence we can have on our clients, which I'm going to talk about in a mo. Before I do, I just want to talk about the actual kind of more intrinsic benefits of going towards this kind of taking these sorts of actions. So there are 4 key benefits we've highlighted here. There's complying. So obviously larger organizations are increasingly having to comply with this legislation anyway. But that we will need to comply, and surely more legislation will be coming in the future as it becomes more and more urgent, and we have to abide by the Paris Treaty. So it's also about protecting our businesses and our employees from risk and keeping hold of our clients. It's about growing our business. It's a really great way of recruiting fantastic people, and keeping talent and winning tenders. This is a huge thing. Tenders are increasingly demanding evidence of businesses' social value. So if we can show that in the work that we're doing in our businesses, that can really help us win business. And obviously, finally, saving energy means saving money. Okay, fab. So I mentioned earlier, so the idea of the individual carbon footprint, which I've highlighted in relation to the ton of carbon, it's actually, I don't know if you will have heard this, but it's actually quite a controversial concept. It was dreamt up by BP in 2004 as part of a PR campaign. And the idea was that to allegedly kind of transfer responsibility for the counting of carbon emissions from large fossil fuel burning corporations to individuals. So I still believe, I've had this conversation quite a lot with people recently, but I still think it's really valid to focus on our own footprint, because by doing it, we do have some impact, and collectively we have a lot of impact. But also by showing we're doing it and talking about it, we can help normalize it. And behaviorally, you may be familiar with the concept of the social tipping point, but that's the point at which it takes a committed minority adopting new behaviors that can change the social norm and pull the rest of the population along with it. And that's placed currently at 25%, which I think is a really kind of encouraging idea and encouraging concept. But where we can make real change and obviously maximize our influences in our wider networks. So amongst our family and friends, by talking about it, where we work in taking some of the steps that we've been talking about already operationally in our offices and how we work from home. By voting, by writing to our MP, by joining community groups too, and talking to local government. But the one thing that we want to talk about today is about how we can use our roles as insights professionals, because we arguably have an even greater role there. We work with large organizations, we work with large companies and brands which have a huge impact on huge numbers of people and the development of products and services. So this is a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I'm going to go through some of the areas where I think we have the skills and the context to make a really big impact on our clients' emissions. So project setup, we can choose to view each project through a sustainability lens in terms of things like challenging the brief with our clients, offering low carbon methods, including low carbon thinking at every stage. I love this. A recent participant in the training that I was running the other week suggested it including climate thinking in the same way that we do EDI now. So it's just fully embedded in our operations. We can use our really specialist knowledge around methods and disciplines to understand audience attitudes. So thinking things like behavior chains and segmentations are all really useful for really deeply understanding climate attitudes and transferring that into actions for clients. We have, in the recommendations that we make to our clients, we can consider recommendations relating to circular and regenerative products and service development. We're like super skilled at asking questions and using innovative methods to get to the real answers. So helping clients to really, really understand audiences' attitudes to climate, sort of via observational approaches and via wide approaches. And we can also look at sustainability communications. If we think that we're testing communications which might be greenwashing, we can challenge our clients on that. I mean, I would acknowledge that greenwashing is it's a really fraught area. It's really tricky. And we hear similarly the concept of green hushing, where brands are so worried about getting it wrong that they actually don't talk about the good things that they're doing. But this is going to become even more crucial, and this kind of messaging is going to be really important. So although it's hard, we kind of need to educate ourselves. Our clients need to educate ourselves, and it's going to be a competitive advantage to be like really knowledgeable about these areas in the future. So also this cartoon is handy because I think it really shows this good representation of humans' natural inclination for kind of just choosing simple answers, even if they're the wrong answers. So climate is by the whole issue is by its nature really complex, and often we're kind of blinded by the options and by the science, and we can make the wrong choice. But as a sector, we're in a really, really strong position to kind of guide the brands, guide consumers and citizens through all of these complex choices. So I'm nearly finished and ready for your questions, but before I do, I'll just tell you a little bit more about the carbon literacy, before I do tell you a bit more about the carbon literacy training. So as part of the training, and to certify as carbon literate in the day-long training, participants have to make one individual and one organisational pledge, and they have to explain the impact in terms of levels of carbon saved. So these post-its here are from my course the other day at C-Space, where I ran the course with their second cohort. So they had loads of great ideas here, and they're right now developing them into their pledges. And just right across all the times that I've run the course recently, there's been some brilliant pledges. So I thought I'd kind of list some of them in here. This is just what I was thinking about off the top of my head as I was writing the slides. So there are some office specific ones or business specific. I won't read them all out, but there's all loads of different ideas there for things that you can do. And then similarly on projects, there's some really interesting ideas for embedding that climate thinking in the way that we manage our projects and manage our kind of relationships with our clients. There's a really interesting discussion to be had on where the responsibility for implementing this starts and ends in our client relationships. But these are some areas where we can kind of take power in that relationship and implement some change or influence. So this is the data that I had from the very first cohort that we ran at Shift. I think there were 10 people taking part in that cohort. And this is the amount of CO2 that was saved by that first group. So in total, 411 tons of CO2e. When you think about the 100,000 tons in the sector, I think that's really hopeful. Like Shift's a really small agency. There's 20 people there. If that can be multiplied across the sector, everyone can start like signing up to the pledge and making those changes, we can have a really huge impact to reach the net zero emissions. Great, so here's a little bit more about the nature of the course. So the concept was developed by the Carbon Literacy Project in Manchester in 2012. These figures here on the infographic, I just picked those up this morning. This is like the latest one. So when we wrote our sector-specific training course in spring 23, there were around 45,000 citizens certified. And now you can see there that's pretty much doubled at 96,000, over 96,000. And there were 132 carbon literate organisations, and that's now at 248. So it's really, really growing fast. It's recognised as having a high impact by the UN. Some of the key criteria are it offers everyone a day's worth of carbon literacy training. It's aimed at 3 distinct audiences. So those that live, that's community staff. Those that work, that's what we're doing here. And those that study when they deliver it in universities and colleges. Because a key element is that it's relevant to individuals, it's relevant to the organisation. So you're bringing in the science and the knowledge, but also you're relating it really, really directly to examples within your own scenario. And part of this idea is that it has to be related to peer-to-peer delivery. And a key criteria is that the course is developed and delivered by peers. And it's all about knowledge sharing. And that's why I suggested we write the course, because I did the course as my organizational pledge after I'd become carbon literate myself. If you are interested, please do get in touch. There's all sorts of different ways that I can run the course. So just get in touch with me. And if I get enough people from ICG, for example, I can just run a group for ICG folk. Really happy to do that. That's a very quick overview of what's in the full training. So you can see that we really cover the science in the first section, go on through it. And then here's a nice quote from Mike, not Tim, that's his brother, Mike Berners-Lee, that's kind of encouraging. Very few of us are squeaky clean in carbon terms. You don't have to become so overnight, but most of us do need to make serious changes over the next few years. It's important to keep moving in the right direction and enjoy the process of cutting carbon out of our lives. Don't beat yourself up, but don't let yourself off the hook either. And I've just put in here as well the How Bad Are Bananas book. Highly readable, even though it talks about carbon saving, and really recommended. Thanks, everybody. Oh, yeah, I've put this final cartoon in as well. Really like this one because it's very uplifting. What if we went to all this effort and it was for nothing? But look at all these fantastic things that we can get out of taking some action. Lovely. Thanks, everyone.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jenny. That certainly gave us lots of food for thought. Anybody want to raise their hand and ask a question? Otherwise, I'll start looking through the chat page. Perhaps you could stop sharing.
Yes.
And let's see people's faces. Okay, let's whiz back up again. Right, so I mean, this is a question, unless there's any hands up. No, I can't see any. Okay, so I kicked off with a question. I heard or read somewhere recently that using AI will have a big negative impact on our carbon emissions due to high use of computing power and data centers. What are your views on this? You touched on that a little bit. I don't know if you want to expand a bit.
Yes, I mean, I did touch on it, and I think someone had requested that I touch on this as well in the webinar. And it is a really thorny issue because obviously it's happening. It's not going to not happen. But the data that I looked at, and in the context of carbon literacy, where you look at the actual comparative emissions of different activities, the search for an AI search is dramatically higher than it is for like a Google search. It's like 4 times higher, because of the heating and the cooling and the processes that have to go on in one search. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the answer is. The answer is renewable energy, because converting to renewables means that all those data centers are being powered by wind or solar, and that ceases to become an issue, and then it's just about the grid.
Is there any legislation at the moment that says that if you build a computer center, data center, then there has to be some form of using that heat, for example, a swimming pool, or heating houses in the local vicinity, or powering a greenhouse or something like that, so that there's a positive benefit of or some way of using that heat that's generated?
I have read about. I don't think there's legislation, but I could be wrong. I don't think there's legislation around it, but I have read some of those ideas of heating swimming pools from the server centers, which sounds really interesting.
Okay, other questions? No hands up yet. A simple question from me. I'm a fan of a phone call over an online call, if it's appropriate, but wondered about the carbon footprint of each. Is there a benefit to having a phone call instead? It feels like there would be, but I don't really know. That's from Linda.
That's a really good question. And actually, Mike Berners-Lee's book, you can look that up in the index and it will give you the exact comparison. Sorry, I don't have it with me right now, but I'm not getting a cut of his royalties. But it is really good because you can just look in the index. It's got everything kind of laid out from low carbon all the way through to high carbon. It's super chatty, and it's got like all of those comparisons of little different things that are similar. So it's things like reading a book or reading books on a Kindle, for example. So like a book's a good unit because a paperback book, he puts at 1 kilogram of CO2e, and you have to read something like 36 books on your Kindle before you've used up the amount of embedded carbon in the Kindle. So there are all sorts of useful tips like that. I'm afraid I don't know the exact answer for the phone call versus the email.
So Linda also makes a lovely suggestion. I don't know if there's something we could look at in the future, but she'd love to learn more, and Jenny could train an ICG group. So just maybe we could have a training session for us. One of your slides, this is Jill. Don't know if you want to ask your question yourself, Jill. I could have asked Linda to do that. Do you want to ask it yourself, or shall I read this?
Yeah, no, I can ask it. Hi, Jenny.
Hi,
yeah,
Jill.
on one of your slides, I think it was the one where you had sort of examples of individual and organisation pledges. You had a point, I think you were making points about using adapted templates and things like that, which I assume is saving time recreating things. But you also said looking at briefs, proposals and reports. I think it said through or with a low emissions filter. And I just wondered exactly what that meant.
Yeah, so we've talked about that quite a lot and in the trainings, and it's things like the way I've looked at it in the training actually is looking at the kind of the life cycle of a project. So like from the point at which you get your brief from the client, you might read the brief and kind of challenge and if it's appropriate, obviously not every time, but sometimes it might be appropriate to spot that they're not asking a particular question of a particular audience that's really relevant to climate. It's really about kind of looking at each of those stages and thinking, where could that make a difference? And one of the ways in which that kind of becomes embedded is if you just have it always in a checklist, or it's always on like as a point on a meeting agenda template. It's always on a point like, so when you're doing your proposal writing and you're developing proposal templates, there'll always be like, what's the low carbon option for this methodology? It's just about kind of thinking about ways where instead of kind of what the fear of a lot of people when they start the training is we'll do the training. And then you go, well, that was really interesting. And then you kind of put it away and you just crack on because you're so busy and you're in your agency and you're super busy on all your projects. But if it's kind of if you kind of take the time to embed that into each stage as part of your processes, then it necessarily just becomes more of a way of life and like something that you just naturally start thinking about. And that's about conversations as well, because if you've got it inside in all of your templates and in all of your processes, you automatically will be discussing it more, and it just becomes normal to talk about it and not kind of a bit sticky or tricky.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Brilliant. So I think Rebecca's got a question. Rebecca, are you still on? Yes. Rebecca, do you want to ask your question, or shall I read it out for you?
Yeah, sure, because I didn't articulate it very well in the chat. Sorry, I'm on the move, so excuse my me not turning on the camera as well. Yeah, so I mean that was amazing. Thank you, Jenny. And for me, it's like finding little practical ways, in everyday life to, as I'm sure it is for everybody. So some ideas in there were really useful. I just like the other kind of thing that's always in my head is plastic usage, which I'm sure is related to this in some ways, but I just wondered if you have any thoughts on whether that gets tackled separately, or I don't know if you've got any big ideas as well as to how to do.
Yeah, I mean, in the big training, the long training, I do mention it. One of the reasons it's not kind of tackled head on is because the training's all about carbon emissions, and plastic use is much more about biodiversity than it is about reducing emissions. Obviously, they go hand in hand, and it is mentioned, and there's some ideas in the course for like, I mean, there are some obvious things to do. So if you're kind of catering for groups and that kind of thing, or getting in lunches for big meetings or workshops or whatever, it's about thinking, can we go plastic free for those events? And do we have a company policy where we go plastic free for those events? That kind of thing we can start kind of implementing. but in terms of you know, what can we do about it? That it's not a huge part of the course, but also I think it's just interlinked. It's just interlinked.
Yeah, and it's mindset as well, isn't it? Once you've got around the carbon side, probably you're naturally more inclined to start thinking more.
Totally. And if you're thinking about greening your supply chain, if you're thinking about suppliers you're using for hospitality and food and that kind of thing, if you're looking at low carbon options already, then that sort of organization will also be thinking about their plastic use. And it's the sort of thing, like, once you've got one thing on your checklist for that supplier, you're going to also put the plastics thing on the checklist for that supplier. You're not going to drop it. It's not going to drop off, is it? It's going to be intrinsically part of that.
Yeah, thank you.
That's great. I think we've gone through the questions. Are there any other questions out there that you'd like to put to Jenny before we log off? Liz, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I haven't got my
Hi, Liz.
Gosh, it's all a bit bright. What am I? Carbon offsetting is often a somewhat contentious area, and certainly some of the interviews I've been doing with claims organisations recently, they're sort of not talking about it anymore. In your slides, you suggested, I think you used the term high quality carbon offsetting. Are there reliable sources that avoid or help you identify carbon offset sources that aren't complete hokum?
Well, it's very unregulated, and that's why it's so contentious. So even when I keep reading as well about companies which, you know, they're getting bad-mouthed on Panorama, even though, I mean, I think I've been in contact with them, and I think their hearts are completely in the right place. So there's like this sort of, it's such a thorny issue, but there is something called, and I talk about this in the course, there's something called the Oxford Principles for Carbon Offsetting, and it gives you a set of principles to follow. Primarily it's about understanding what those principles are, which is quite tricky. And I think I mentioned the video. I do have a really good video on it, which I can send around if you'd like, which kind of explains the issues. But it's about kind of understanding what the offset is and whether the offset is permanent. So for example, if you're going to plant if the offset is planting a lot of trees, are those trees definitely going to stay there, or are they going to be cut down? In which case the offset is useless. There is also recommendations around buying offsets which are linked to kind of community co-benefits, because that's kind of, they're much more likely to be more permanent offsets if they're related to kind of a community. And obviously, you know, that's a great thing anyway, if it's going to benefit a local community, rather than just be, let's randomly plant some trees in this place where probably could have done with using the land for something else in that actual location. So it is really controversial. The most important thing is to look for carbon removal. So that's like carbon capture and storage and biomass. But there is also an issue with that, because there's just not enough offsets based in that for everyone to buy their offsets. So the recommendation is to kind of start with that, get what you can of that, and then top it up with carbon avoidance offsetting. But it is really complicated, and it's taken me ages to even vaguely get my head around it, I have to tell you. So but yeah, we're sort of getting there now. But I think the most important thing is I think it's probably easy to go to talk to people, do your research, get a bit of an understanding, then look at the different companies, and then just kind of interrogate what the offsets are based on the things that you know. So it is about educating yourself first, and then kind of using that education to interrogate the suppliers. I think that's the best way.
Fantastic. Any other questions? We have a few minutes left. Natalie.
Hello. Hello. Thank you, Jenny, for that. That's fascinating. And I like to what Liz just said and what we just discussed about offsetting. That's a simple question I've always been thinking. You know, when we talk about planting a tree, yes, that is definite, and but it's in like 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. You know, so the
That's huge
relevance
as well.
of these various methods. Well, I remember you were talking about concepts, a client talking about concepts around that. And I felt a bit embarrassed to present it to consumers. And, you know, yeah, of course. And that's what people say, you know, planting a tree, yes, but that's in 5 years, 10 years. So what do you think of these various methods again? Probably it's what you said, a case of educating oneself.
Yeah, I think it is really. I mean, there are a few different things. There's the planting. I mean, the one which kind of I just think is quite at the other end of the stream, which is ineffective, is you can pay an offset to a company which will stop some trees from being cut down. And often those trees weren't even going to be cut down. So it's literally just an empty promise. I'm trying to think what the examples are of things in between that. So one of the co-benefit one was, so there's a community who's chopping down trees to burn the wood to boil water. So the offset is creating a water system for that community. So they have clean water, so they no longer have to burn down the forest to heat the water. That's an example of a co-benefit, an offset with co-benefits, which is really impactful because it really impacts the community as well. But yeah, like I say, the only surefire one is actual carbon removal via those kind of carbon capture and storage technologies.
Okay, any more questions? I think that's probably it. So thank you very much, Jenny. Really interesting. We'll have to pursue the idea of possibly trying to get a training day in there, but we'll have a chat with you about that offline.
Yeah, for sure. I'd love to. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Yes, please, to the video. I don't know if we can put that on the website so people can watch it, but certainly if you could send that to us, and I'm sure
I can put it on the if you give me 1 sec, I can probably find it now, to be honest with you. Carry on talking and I'll find it.
If you just share it with Lucy, then she can
okay.
I will circulate
for sure.
this group or put it online if possible. Right, so thank you very much to Jenny. Thank you to everybody for logging on today, and do come back and join us for one of our future webinars. Have a great day. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.